Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. We got a good one lined up. Someone's really digging into personal finance basics.
Yeah, it looks like they're really after that solid foundation, not just the what, but the why. Always a good place to start.
Totally. So we're diving into the podcast episode they sent, gonna unpack the good stuff, and they don't waste any time. Jump right into budgeting.
Which, let's be real, doesn't always sound like the most thrilling topic.
Right. But they make a great point. It's like a roadmap. If you're heading out on a road trip, you wouldn't just pick a direction and hope for the best.
Exactly. You got to know where you're going, how you'll get there. Same with your money. Without a budget, you're kind of just winging it.
And that rarely ends well, financially speaking.
Right. So this episode lays out this 50-30-20 rule, a good starting point, at least a framework.
Okay, break that down for us. 50-30-20 of what exactly?
So 50% of your after-tax income, that's the key that goes towards your needs. The non-negotiables, rent or mortgage, groceries, got to keep the lights on, those kinds of things.
Makes sense. 50% on the essentials. What about the other half?
So 30% of that after-tax income, that's allocated for your wants. Think dining out, entertainment, that streaming service you maybe don't need.
Okay, so that's where you get to have a little fun with it.
Exactly. It's not about deprivation. It's about being mindful.
All right, so we've got needs, wants. That leaves 20%. What's the magic formula for that chunk?
This is where you shift from just surviving to really building for the future. That 20% is all about savings and paying down any debt you might have.
Gotcha. So it's not just about having enough to scrape by. It's about being intentional with your money.
Right. That 20%, even if it seems small, it can have a huge psychological impact. Instead of feeling stuck, you're actively shaping your financial future.
I can see how that would be empowering, knowing you're working towards something. But what about when debt feels like this huge obstacle in the way?
Yeah, they definitely don't shy away from that. They actually have a whole section on managing debt. And one thing they emphasize is that debt itself isn't always a bad thing.
Okay, that's an interesting take. How so?
It's about understanding how to use it responsibly. Like, sometimes debt can be a tool to achieve a larger goal as long as you're strategic about it.
All right, so how do they suggest tackling that debt, assuming it's the kind we want to get rid of?
They introduce a couple of popular methods, the snowball and the avalanche. We can dig into those, but
Okay,
first...
so before we get into those debt-crushing strategies, snowball, avalanche, you said?
Exactly. Those are the ones. But they slip in this other crucial point first. Even while you're dealing with debt, building an emergency fund is key.
Okay, so it's like you're trying to get ahead, but also got to be prepared for the unexpected.
Exactly. They call it your financial safety net, which I love. Life happens, right? And having that cushion can make all the difference in how you handle those curveballs.
So how much are we talking about here? How big a safety net should we be aiming for?
They recommend having 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses stashed away.
Wow. Okay, that's
Yep.
not insignificant.
Right. It takes time to build that up, but even starting small, being consistent with those savings, it really adds up.
So even if you're still chipping away at debt, they're saying start building that emergency fund simultaneously.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, tackling existing debt, sure, but also being prepared for those unexpected expenses.
Makes sense. So once we've got our budgeting sorted, our debt managed, emergency fund growing, what comes next?
Well, then they take us into the world of investing. And I know for some people, that word alone can be kind of intimidating.
Oh, for sure. It can feel really overwhelming, like you need to be some kind of Wall Street whiz to even dip your toes in.
Right. But this episode does a great job of demystifying it. They stress that you don't need to be a financial expert or have tons of money to get started.
That's reassuring, at least. So where do they recommend starting? What are the key takeaways for newbie investors?
Well, they emphasize starting small and thinking long-term. They really break down the power of compound interest the earlier you start. Even with small amounts, the more time your money has to grow. It's actually pretty amazing.
I've heard of compound interest, but honestly, it always seemed a bit like magic to me. Like I didn't really get how it worked.
So think of it like this. It's basically interest earning interest. When you invest, your money earns interest. But then that earned interest is reinvested, and it starts earning interest on itself, too.
Ah, okay, so it just keeps building on itself.
Exactly. It's like a snowball effect. And the longer you let it roll, the bigger it gets.
That makes more sense. So are there specific types of investments they recommend?
They talk about index funds as a great option for beginners, basically. You're investing in a basket of stocks that track a specific market index.
So instead of picking individual stocks, which feels risky and also, frankly, way above my pay grade,
Right, exactly. With an index fund, you're betting on the overall performance of the market, which is generally a safer, more passive approach, especially for long-term growth.
Gotcha. They also mentioned retirement accounts, right? Like 401ks, IRAs, that kind of thing.
Yes. They dedicate a whole segment to retirement planning, and they stress how important it is to start early, even if you can only contribute small amounts initially.
Makes sense. The earlier you start, the more time that compound interest has to work its magic, right?
Precisely. They even share this anecdote about two people who invest the same amount of money overall, but one starts at 25, the other at 35. The one who starts earlier ends up with way more at retirement, purely because of the time factor.
Wow. Okay, that's a pretty compelling argument for starting sooner rather than later. So we've covered budgeting, debt, that all-important emergency fund, even dipped our toes into investing for the long haul. What else is there? Is there some kind of like secret sauce to all this personal finance stuff?
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground: budgeting, debt, emergency funds, investing few. It's a lot to process, but it feels like there's still this missing piece.
You're right, there's more to it than just the mechanics of managing money. This episode actually dives into that, the often overlooked aspect of mindset.
Okay, so it's not just about the numbers, it's about how we think about money.
Exactly. They argue that your thoughts, your beliefs, even your attitude towards money, those can really impact your financial decisions and ultimately your outcomes.
So if you have a negative attitude towards money, it can actually sabotage your efforts.
That's what they're suggesting, yeah. They talk about this concept of financial self-talk, that internal dialogue we all have going on about money. Oh, I know exactly what you mean, like catching yourself thinking, I'm so bad with money, or I'll never be able to afford that.
Exactly. And they say the first step is just becoming aware of those thoughts. Are they mostly positive, or are you constantly putting yourself down when it comes to finances?
And if it's mostly negative, like those examples I just gave, then what? How do you change that internal script?
They suggest challenging those negative thoughts. Like when you catch yourself saying, I'm terrible with money, ask yourself, is that really true?
Right, because most of the time, it's probably not even true. Just this like ingrained belief.
Exactly. They say often those negative beliefs are rooted in fear or past experiences that might not even be relevant anymore.
So reframing those thoughts is key, turning I can't afford that into I'm working towards being able to afford that.
Yes. It's about shifting your perspective, focusing on what you can control, and being kind to yourself along the way. They even talk about visualization, like creating a vision board.
Oh, I love that. So you're basically surrounding yourself with images and affirmations that represent your goals. Yeah.
Exactly. Keeping those aspirations front and center, reminding yourself of what you're working towards. But they're also realistic, you know? They acknowledge that achieving financial well-being, it takes time and effort. It's not going to happen overnight.
And there will be setbacks along the way, right? Like that's just part of the process.
Definitely. And they really stress the importance of not letting those setbacks derail you. It's about viewing them as learning opportunities.
So like if you overspend 1 month, don't beat yourself up about it. Just acknowledge it. Figure out what happened and get back on track.
Exactly. It's about progress, not perfection. And they encourage celebrating the small victories along the way. Every milestone, no matter how small, is worth acknowledging.
Totally. Like paid off a credit card, that's huge. Hit a savings goal, time to celebrate. It's about building that positive momentum.
Absolutely. And they also talk about the power of community, surrounding yourself with people who support your goals.
Because let's face it, trying to do anything alone, especially something as challenging as managing your finances, it's just so much harder.
Right. They suggest joining online forums, maybe finding a local workshop, even starting a money club with friends.
Love that. And they also remind us that it's okay to ask for help, right? Like seeking out professional guidance when you need it.
Absolutely. A financial advisor, a therapist who specializes in money matters, even just accessing free financial literacy resources online. It's about empowering yourself with knowledge and support.
I love that. It's like you don't have to be a financial expert to take control of your finances. There's help available. Wow, this episode is like a crash course in financial well-being. From practical tips to that all-important mindset shift, they really covered it all.
They did. And I think that's what makes this episode so valuable. It's not just about the what of personal finance, but the why, which is so important for staying motivated and making lasting change.
Couldn't agree more. Well, a huge thank you to you for breaking it all down for us. And to everyone listening, we hope you found this deep dive as insightful as we did. Remember, personal finance is a journey, but armed with the right tools and mindset, you've got this. Until next time, Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep building that brighter financial future.